Hello, I'm David Ringstrom, CPA in Atlanta, and welcome to this presentation on Power BI and also Excel-based alternatives. Power BI is a presentation platform where you can create visualizations, interactive visualizations for summarizing all different types of data sets, and those visualizations can be shared on mobile devices and also on web pages. It is a subscription platform if you're going to share the reports, so there is a catch there that we will discuss. Power BI is a big, sprawling platform, and many times we have to really search around to find different features that we want. So as a matter of grounding and kind of giving you a sense of what to look for in Power BI, I'm also going to create the same reports in Excel. The common thread between Power BI and Excel is going to be the Power Query feature. We use Power Query on both platforms in order to transform data into the format so that it can then be summarized. We're going to be spending some time in Excel, again, as some scene setting for how things are done in Power Query. Power Query, but also Power BI. So when I'm in Excel, I'll be using the Microsoft 365 version of Excel. When I'm in Power Query, I'll be using the desktop version of Power Query, and we'll talk about the differences there. Along the way, though, all along through Excel, Power Query, and Power BI, I will be showing you everything at least twice. I'll first walk you through it on the PowerPoint slides, which are very detailed and have numbered steps. Then I'll go over to the corresponding program and carry out those techniques firsthand. You hopefully have the handouts for today. They are on the event main page. If you have any issues accessing them, just drop me a note, ask@davidringstrom.com. Happy to give them to you after the presentation. So let's get into our material, and let's just see what the difference between these three applications are. So Microsoft Excel, as we know, is a spreadsheet that does include data transformation and presentation tools. Power Query is one of those data transformation tools. So Power Query is built into Excel. It's also built into Power BI. It's not a separate app that you can go buy. You can't just go out Power Query and use it in isolation, but it does come with part of the package with Excel and also Power BI. Now, with that said, there is a Power BI desktop app. That's a Windows app, and that's what I'll be running today to create our desktop. There's also an online subscription platform. It's called the Power BI Service. The Power BI Service does not include Power Query. So your data has to be pretty clean already if you're going to use the Power BI Service to build a dashboard. There are also mobile apps for Windows, Apple, and Android devices. Those would typically be used for consuming information rather than creating information. We're going to be focused mostly today on creating information. Reports that you create with Power BI can be published to the internet. That does require a subscription, though. So there's always a catch. So the Power BI desktop app is free to download and use, and any reports that you want to share, you can share them by sharing the .pbix file that gets created, much like sharing an Excel workbook. Conversely, if you want to publish your files online so that they're available in the mobile app or in a web browser, you can use the free Power BI service. There's a free tier that you can access at app.powerbi.com. But you then cannot share any reports that you create with others unless you either commit to a pro subscription. And if you have a pro subscription, then anyone else that wants to see the report has to have a subscription as well. Or there is a premium subscription, and the premium subscription does allow you to share certain reports with others without them requiring having them have to have a subscription fee. So remember, you cannot use Power BI. You cannot use Power Query. So many powers here. You cannot use Power Query with the Power BI service. You can only use Power Query with the Power BI desktop app. So a typical Power BI workflow You could start in Excel. You don't have to, but many times, because we have familiarity with Excel or data might be in an Excel spreadsheet, we could start the process in Excel and then take data that's in an Excel spreadsheet and pull it into Power Query. You can also use Power Query to bypass Excel, though, and pull data directly from databases, PDF files, web queries, text files, as we're going to see a whole host of different data sources. So Power Query allows us to transform our data. I've got an aging report that we're going to be working with as our sample data, just because that's an easy to comprehend. And also the report has a number of issues, and because many times the data that we want to include on reports or dashboards may not be in a clean format. It may have to go through a transformation process. For those of us that are not currently using Power Query, that means often that we are doing the transformation work by hand in Excel, which then sets up a repetitive process. One of the benefits of Power Query is that once you go through the transformation process once, then going forward, you can just refresh the data. You don't have to go through all the cleanup work, and then the cleaned up data can then be either shared with Excel or Power BI. So Power Query allows you to relate data from two or more tables together, apply number formatting, remove data that you don't want, and so on. And so the results, that cleaned up data, we can either send it to Excel, or we can use, there's a separate version of Power Query that works with Power BI. And they're similar, but there's a few little differences that we'll see. So, but you will have a leg up on the Power BI version of Power Query if you already have familiarity with the Excel version of Power Query. So once the data is in Power BI, you might choose to summarize it with matrices, which are the Power BI equivalent of a pivot table in Excel. If you're not familiar with a pivot table, pivot tables are a report writing feature that allows us to summarize a list of data into concise formats. And so often data that we are going to present in Power BI might be in the form of a matrix, which is, again, is the equivalent of a pivot table. We can make it be interactive by using the slicer feature in Power BI. We can also add other visuals, such as charts. We can add tables, and we're also going to see that there is a Q&A tool for Power BI that lets you ask questions with natural language. So once you've connected your data set to Power BI, you can then ask questions about it inside Power BI. And I did not include a slide on it, but there is an equivalent feature that will show you in Excel that's called the Analyze Data feature that lets us do the same thing in Excel. So in some regards, there's somewhat of a parallel universe in some ways between Power BI and Excel. The difference, though, with Excel, we can create formulas, we can do a lot of things that we don't have that infrastructure in Power BI. Power BI is more about presenting data in a variety of formats, and we'll see it's all about visualizing the data, whereas with Excel, many times we are transforming or analyzing the data. Now, when we're choosing data sources for either Excel or Power BI, we want to choose carefully. So I've got two different aging schedules here. These are actually not the ones that we're going to use, but I just want to show you that when you're picking reports, you want to stay away typically from summary reports, because a summary report like this is really the end result that we're often seeking with a pivot table or with Power BI with some sort of visualization. And so there's not enough detail here for us to really do anything with. The data is already broken down into columns, which means we can't, the data would need to be in a different format, and I'll show you the detail format in a moment, that would make it analysis ready. So this is kind of jumping to the end here. When you try to take a report like this, it's just not going to give you enough detail to do any sort of analysis with, because at this point, this report is already summarized. This is an example of a more detailed report, and this is the kind of data that you want to be bringing into Power Query. Now, we can see this is not an ideal report format, and we sometimes don't have a choice. We can export the data out of an accounting program or property management software or whatever platform it is, and the format is the format. But as we're going to see, Power Query will help us easily whip this report into shape, and then we can summarize it in Excel or with Power BI. But when you're looking for reports to include with Power BI or to do analysis in Excel, you want as much detail as possible, because the goal is to use the tools inside the software platforms to summarize it. If it's already summarized, then it's much like trying to, dehydrate a dehydrated product. It's already, all the water's already sucked out of it. So let's get an overview of what our process is going to look like. This is the process that we're going to go through in Excel. There will be a similar process that we'll go through in Power Query. So we're going to have a report that will be our basis for our summaries that we're going to create, and is an aging schedule for the month of September. And so I want to save that somewhere as my data source. But what I want to stay away from, I don't want to name it September Aging Report. I want to give it a generic name such as Aging Schedule.xlsx. The reason for that is that with both Excel and with Power Query, I can export a new aged receivable schedule from my accounting software and save over this placeholder file. And then I'll be able to refresh those results into my end report there without having to go through the transformation steps again. So it will create confusion if you name your data source September aging and then October rolls around and then you're saving the October file over the September file. That's going to create a lot of confusion. So that's why you want to steer clear of putting any sort of dating system in the file name there. You just want it to have a generic name that you'll then connect to with Power Query, and then we'll be able to transform that report. So working in Excel, we're going to have two files. We're going to have the data source file, which is file number 1. Second file will be just a blank Excel workbook where we will store our Power Query work. The equivalent that we'll have with Power BI is we'll have a Power BI file, and then it will connect to an Excel file as the data source. So within Excel, we will go to step 3, which is the data menu. In step 4, we'll say get data. Step 5, from file. Step 6, from Excel workbook. We'll then select our generic placeholder file that we have. That's step 7. From there, we will use the Power Query editor to transform the data and then return the results back to the Aging Report Tool workbook. Once we've done that, if we want, we can take the October Aging Report file and save it over the September file. We right-click on the Power Query results, or on the data menu, there's a refresh all command. We choose that. We'll then see the transformed October results show up in our aging tool, and then any pivot tables or charts that we've created will update at the same time. And so it becomes a set and forget approach there, where once you've gone through the transformation steps, then you don't have to worry about those going forward.